Uplands make up 14% of the Irish land area. For decades, multiple pressures have resulted in the condition of our upland habitats being assessed as bad or bad and deteriorating. Faith Wilson is an ecologist specialising in habitat surveys, assessment and restoration.
We've had 3 cycles of monitoring of the uplands in Ireland, and there has been no improvement in upland habitat condition in the last 20 years. Nearly all our upland habitats are in what's called unfavourable, bad condition.
For the last 5 years, Faith has been the official ecologist for the publicly funded Sustainable Uplands Agri-Environmental Scheme, or SUAS, here in the Wicklow Mountains. SUAS was set up to work out how farmers could deliver better quality habitats in the uplands. Today is the final day of the project. One of the most controversial practices in the uplands is the burning of scrubland to clear it for sheep to graze. Farmers in SUAS trialled control burning on small areas to assess its impact. Declan Byrne is a project manager.
As part of SUAS, we've done a controlled burn area here on an area, much like that to start with, to see if it's possible to do it, what the logistics of doing it is, and what comes back afterwards.
And Faith, from an ecological perspective, is it beneficial to do this?
You can see behind us here where we did burn, we're basically getting gorse coming back. And okay, some other vegetation has come through it. You can see some grasses, you can see some heather. But what has happened then is the animals have all congregated here. This area then becomes overgrazed. So you're kind of creating a little pocket that keeps the animals in one area as opposed to spreading them out across the hill.
SUAS farmers also tried an alternative to controlled burning, cutting of the scrubland by hand with a brush cutter, along with the use of a tractor and mulcher.
And why is it in patches around the hill?
Okay, if we start to do all of this in one area, what we do is we suck all the sheep in from surrounding areas and they'll overgraze on those areas that we've treated. Whereas if we do small patches throughout the whole area, we keep the sheep dispersed right throughout the whole area, rather than pulling them all off those other areas.
And why do you want them dispersed around the whole area?
Because if we take the sheep off of them, there will be less grazing on them and they will get tall and leggy much faster.
Okay. Cutting manually, cutting with a machine, is it better for the land?
Yeah, it's been very interesting trialling these different methods, because the important thing to pick up on here is we have a pretty much intact moss layer. So that means we're not losing any peat. We're still having the flow of water off the hill. And the heather is resprouting from the cut areas, and we're actually diversifying the sward. And now in this area, we're starting to get frockin coming back in. We're starting to get a diversity of other grasses and sedges. And so it's mimicking what a grazing animal would do.
Sheep are a very familiar sight on our uplands, but one SUAS farmer nearby, Pat Dunn, introduced black Galloway cattle into his upland area in Glenmalure.
The cattle will graze more tougher vegetation and they'll graze it from the top down, rather than the sheep are more selective. They will graze down at the butt of it, whereas the cattle will graze tougher old vegetation, let more light in. It gives the grasses at the bottom a chance of getting up.
Fencing the uplands is expensive and unviable, so instead the cattle wear GPS collars paid for by SUAS, which act as a virtual fence.
When the cattle come within about 10 metres out from the virtual line, it plays an audio. The nearer they get to it, the louder the audio gets. And when they come to the actual boundary then, they get a shock. But in general, they don't go to the boundary.
Further up the mountain, a team of farmers and volunteers are planting native Irish trees along the waterways. 8,000 trees have been planted in the Wicklow uplands as part of this project.
I suppose everybody knows the benefits of trees from a biodiversity point of view, carbon sequestration. But the reason we're planting along the brooks up along here is to help stabilise the banks, to stop any further erosion from coming down. And also, the trees along the streams help during the summer when the temperatures are high and the water flow is low. They shade water and they keep the temperatures in the water low for the wildlife that's living in the water.
Overgrazing and burning have caused considerable damage to this upland area. Farmers and volunteers, along with the National Parks and Wildlife Service staff, are working together to try to restore the habitats. They're building dams to re-wet the damaged blanket bog.
As you walk across the surface of the bog, you may have noticed coming up here, bogs should be wet and spongy, but it's not. It's dried in
very
that upper
dry.
layer.
Yeah.
And there's loads of these cracks and slumps happening. And basically, the bog is moving off the hill. The peat is being washed off and the whole surface is being slumped and moving. So we're trying to slow the flow. We're not trying to stop the water, but we're trying to slow the flow. So the more that we can keep water on the hill, that we can keep the peat covered, whether it's by water or by revegetating the bare areas, that'll keep all that dissolved organic carbon in the ground. And that's really what we're trying to do.
The land here on Granamore Commonage is part of the Wicklow National Park, and it's owned by the public through the National Parks and Wildlife Service. It's a designated special area of conservation, and the farmers have grazing rights.
The shareholders, I'd say, over hundreds of years, we never got together. And I'd say it's the first time in the SUAS Project that we actually all collected in a room and talked about the hill. You know, it's the first time ever.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you ever think that this would be part of your role as a farmer to do this?
Definitely not, no.
Yeah.
And that's the simple truth.
It probably does the opposite of what we were always trying to do, trying to drain land. So now we're actually trying to re-wet.
After 5 years in SUAS, some of the farmers have now applied for the new National Agri-Environmental Scheme, ACRES.
I would have loved to see SUAS continued on and scaled up, but that decision wasn't in our hands. So now we're going into ACRES. We're not quite sure yet what is going to be involved in ACRES. We're hoping that it will carry on much of what had been done.
I want our uplands to provide sustainable livelihoods for our communities. I want them to be sequestering carbon. I want them to be providing rich habitats. I want them to be full of birdsong, full of insect life. I want to come up here and see hares and peregrine falcons and red grouse. And I want them to give farmers a livelihood.